This is Bolu. I'm from Ericsson, and the thing I'd like to talk about today is the open source modeling, the importance of the community and the impact on the business model. So just to give a bit of background, from an Ericsson point of view, we've essentially been using modeling since the 90s. So it started with technologies like SDL, and then we moved into using object time, and that was small scale at the beginning when the cell phone networks were being developed, the base stations. And over time, these tools have become key in terms of the development process. So if you look at the base stations that are deployed today, you would have the radio base station, the network controller, and the radio base stations that are essentially developed with, used to be object time, then it was Rose real time, then it's RSA-RTE today. And we're using it for the whole process, from the software design to the code generation to the deployment in the actual system. We're also using a lot of modeling for information modeling, the data that are exchanged between the different layers of the systems or between the end user of the system, and the system itself. It's used at the system modeling level, and we now have new usage of it for things like network architecture modeling that I'll be talking a bit about, just showing you an example of a DSL that we've been developing. And if you're thinking more broadly, people doing business process modeling, they're using tools as well. So you can think of a fairly rich set of tools that are in use on a daily basis, both from a technology point of view, a technical development, and from a business point of view. And over years, they've demonstrated to be highly successful. Many people have made the claim, VPs, that without this type of tools, we would not have been able to develop the base station in such an efficient manner. And what if, in those agile days that we're living in now, what if we're just going back to code? Maybe we'll be more agile. And that's true that you could solve a problem by being more agile at the code level, but when you get to the system level, you need to have, if you're left with code, you don't have this larger overview. So modeling, it's not re-questioned. It is re-questioned on a regular basis to say, do we really need this? Because one of the things we've been struggling with is the tools, as I'll be discussing. But ultimately, the question or the answer always come back to, no, we need modeling. I mean, we can't really do without. And until now, we've essentially been using the commercial tools, and we've been using a number of them. Essentially, most of the tools are either in use or have been used in one way or another. The one thing also we realize is over the last 15 years, if we take the main base station development, we went from object time, that was the tool that was used in the 90s, to Rose real time after Irrational acquired object time, and then migrated to RSA-RTE. So that's also a concern. While we had good technology over time, those migrations are expensive and take time, right? And we don't control those migrations. They are done not by our decision, but they are done because the products are getting at the end of their life cycle, and then you need to change. So while we were very successful, tools have failed with respect to many aspects, and that's part of the re-questioning on a regular basis, whether do we really need those tools or can't we work directly with programming. And if we look at where the tools have failed, they have failed with respect to a number of aspects. They're way too complex to use. Like Eclipse has thanks to Eclipse, greatly contributed to this as well. The environment is more complex, and Eclipse has brought a whole bunch of good things. I mean, we now have an IDE, we can integrate with CDT. There are a number of good things, but there's also a cost from a usability point of view, which is perceived to be more complex. We need more capabilities with respect to a number of aspects, and I'll get back to that point. But it's pretty pathetic when we look and when we realize the fact that we have today probably less in terms of functionality for a developer than we had in the 90s, in spite of the hundreds of millions that have been invested in the industry on modeling tools. That's a shock. No support, or essentially very little support for true DSL or DSML development in current UML tools. That's a main problem. And we need more integrations. We need to be integrated. No matter how much we want to bring everything to Eclipse, no matter how much we'd like to bring everything to UML, no matter how much we'll always be living in an heterogeneous world where there will be a Simulink or another tool that we need to integrate with that are developed on a different platform. That's reality. We may try to reduce it as much as possible. Will never be eliminated. If we look from a business point of view, what do we want? Like, we want to control our own destiny. We're at the point where we can no longer accept that it's the tool providers that are determining the functionality we can use to innovate. Our capacity to innovate is directly related to the technology we have. How can we accept that we're not driving this? Like, even Ericsson, I mean, it's not a small account for the tool providers, and ultimately we have very little success on pushing through the functionality that we want. And I'm not talking about any specific tools here. I'm talking tools in general. Okay. So we want to make sure that our designers are empowered. If they need something, they can ask for it. We can have it. We can go to faster development. I mean, of course, the cost is always there. I mean, it's not the primary goal, but we're no longer living in the 90s, so I don't know many companies that have open budget, right? Like a C-level manager can no longer sign for $500,000 without asking to anybody else to sign the check. You need like 5 levels of signatures, and I mean, that's the reality. So the money is important. So ultimately, we'd like to be more efficient. We'd like to get more. I mean, we want everything. Like, we want to get more. We want to get it for cheaper, right? And that's one of the problems, actually. We're going to talk about the business model at the end of this talk, and that's one of the problems. Like, when the tools were sold for $25,000, and you could sell 20 licenses in a group of 10, just in case they were hiring 10 more, right? That was a different business. Today, and I was a CEO of a company for 10 years, trying to sell tools. In the bad years, I should have done it in the 90s. But ultimately, if a team has 20 people, if they could buy half a license and share the license in a way that you can't even imagine, they would do it, right? So the sales guy that is going in is not coming back with $1 million PO at the end of the day. If you're lucky, he's going to get with the first PO of $15,000, and then you hope that the next one will be 50. Right? It's a different world that we're living in. And the other thing is, we want the learning curve to be as low as possible. So when we can hire people, then that's one of the things. You want people to get up to speed. So if we look at the needs, if I sit as a developer, like, what do I need? Well, I need a modeling language, and then I need to be able to perform some validation. I mean, if I'm building a model, I have to be able to do something with that model, because otherwise we're in the A days where, you would walk into a company and they say, a wall about that big there, and say, this is my design, and then there will be some type of a Bush diagram or whatever, and then some type of relationships, and people will look at this and say, oh, great architecture, right? No one understood really what it meant, but it was never up to date with respect to the system, so nothing much you could do with it besides putting on a wall. I mean, no, that's not what modeling is about. People will only take the time to model if the model is providing value. Then, you probably want some type of doc gen if you want to talk to other people and to have non-designers looking at this model. And then if you want to generate code, I mean, the first thing you probably want to have is some type of programming language support. In all cases, you want to have like team support. If you have large teams, you need to be able to get your models into a repository somehow and be able to collaborate and share and work together at the same time. And then you probably want to have some code generation. And if you go a bit further, you want to have a runtime on which you can execute. But then if you do that, then what about testing, right? If you can generate, but you cannot write your test cases in the same environment, then it's not that good. But if you do generate tests, and that's one of the things that comes back for us on a regular basis, is that the more powerful the modeling tool is, the more problems we have in the field. You have very complex systems, you have very good code generation, you press a button, you generate very performant code, and then you have a problem. What do you do, right? So, okay, the thing you have is actually debugging at the code level. So what do? I mean, so you get two people in a room, you lock the door, and you have one guy that understands the code and the platform, and then the other person that understands the modeling, and then these guys try to communicate so you can figure out what is the design issue. And, you know, a number of other aspects. And each of these aspects by themselves are very complex capabilities. Like testing, you have unit testing, you have integration testing, you have deployment testing, you have each of these things require different things, integration with the platform, right? So, and in different contexts, you need different subset of these things. If you're doing system modeling, you will not have code generation, but you're going to have model executability or simulation, right? So ultimately, if we're thinking of a tool, what the tool needs to support, if you're a commercial entity, then you know the market is fragmented, and not everybody uses the same context. But you know, if we want to implement this vision, we need to share as much as possible. And the reality is, no single company can provide it. Okay? I mean, look at the situation today. We don't have it. We're far from there. And again, it's not because of the lack of investment. So, what's our position from an Ericsson point of view? We believe that we absolutely need to have an open source alternative. Right? I'll get into what we believe we can do with that. We want to control our destiny, not to have any vendor lock-in. We want to ensure the long-term evolvability and availability and determine when we want to migrate, if we want to migrate, and not be pushed into migration, or to receive a message that this product is end of life, and that's it. Like, nothing to say, it's end of life. So if you want to have support for the next few years, the price is going up, and that's reality, right? And I know that if Ericsson, with the size of the company and the number of developers we have, it was ranked, I think, number 4 or 5 and 5th in the world a couple of years ago in terms of software development. If we experience those problems, it's probably shared by many companies. And the only way to succeed, and I'm going to get back to this point quite much, is to make sure that we have a vibrant community. Because to me and to us, that's the only way where we can actually put in place and realize the vision of model-based development. What happened in the last 30 years? Well, as I said, it's not the lack of investment. Many tools that were developed, these tools are not only all bad, right? They have very good tools, they were very good technologies. If you go back in the 90s, you had companies like ObjectTime and iLogic who developed Rhapsody, and Telelogic had the SDL tools, and you had NoMagic that had basic UML tool, and even Microsoft invested quite much, and then Rational had ROSE, and then there were some acquisitions and integrations, and today, in spite of all of the money that has been invested, and we could say it's over $1 billion, because just the acquisition of Telelogic by IBM was $720 million. And there was much more. So we're facing this problem where, why is it that we don't have better tools? And why don't we have access to more of the required capabilities? If only half of that money had been invested in an incremental manner, as opposed to yet to redo the same thing, just a bit better or a bit worse, I think that we would have more today. But the same type of tool has been developed again and again and again. Right? What have we gained? I would claim not much. And again, it's not because there has not been no investment, and certainly not because there has been a lack of research. Because if you look at the research that has been done worldwide, each of the aspects that I showed before had been quite well researched, and there are actual results. If we look at the language aspect, trying to learn from the past, there were days where we're wondering, the big question was, is an object a square or a triangle or a cloud? Okay. So UML is far from a perfect thing. I think there were a very good talk by Manfred Breu this morning. UML is far from being perfect. There's one thing that UML brought is some basic language, talking about being able to reduce the learning curve. Well, now, not saying that everybody can properly interpret a UML diagram. I mean, the semantic is always an issue, but at least we're not having the issue of a cloud versus a triangle. Okay, so I really believe that UML has brought something. And if we look from a designer point of view, putting UML in the middle of the workspace has allowed to develop a set of DSLs or profiles in this case, not DSL. DSL is a tool thing. Profile is a language thing. So UML is not just a language. UML is a language that has been developed as a base, as a framework that can be used for defining languages. It's something that people often forget. And UML is also a basis that can be used for building DSLs, your own DSL, through profiles, and can be used for researching. There are communities, there are conferences where there's UML-based testing, there's UML-based validation, there's UML-based bunch of things. Right? So that's a great vision, but why doesn't it work in practice? Why is it that we don't get more today from a developer and end user point of view than there were in the 90s, where in fact we had this problem with the languages? There were object time and room as a language. There were the Steve Miller notation. There were, all of these things existed, and I would argue that the developers had more in terms of functionality. Well, I think it's because that open standard is a necessary condition, but not sufficient. And what I mean by that is that the reality is that the problem is not UML, it's the UML tools. Okay? And commercial vendors are building proprietary technology. So even if you have an open standard, if you're trying to develop some functionality at the lower level, it's not only a language thing. It has to be integrated in the tool environment. Okay? I'm going to get back to this. IP protection has been, I believe, in proprietary technology, the main problem. If we look at the situation, right, we have researchers that are there, that are doing great things, and on the other hand, I get nothing. Okay. If I'm sitting at Ericsson desk, we had organized a research day at Ericsson last January. People came in, to give an example, gave a presentation. One group was doing formal methods. You may think that industrial people don't care about formal methods, right? It's academic stuff. No. People are looking at this and say, gee, I understand how I could, at least validate that my protocol to connect the two ports is actually working properly. Right? Not talking about validating the whole system. Using piecewise, something lightweight. If I could do that, that would be great, right? But what's the situation? Well, okay, I'm sitting on the developer side. I'm seeing this presentation. I say, great. What does this guy do to develop the technology? Well, if it's model checking, probably have an homegrown model checker, or maybe using Promella, and it's a different technology. I'm sitting here. I'm using, say, Tool X, RCRTE, or Rhapsody, or whatever, right? Then I have to close my eyes and say, okay, what is the semantic that this guy is using? How does it relate to the semantic that I'm using? And yeah, I think we can figure out how to do it. Even if you can figure out how to do it, you're going to have to face the fact that it's proprietary technology. So migrating this technology here into the technology of the tool, you don't have access to the code. So who's going to do it? The researcher is going to go and sign an agreement with the commercial vendor. I mean, it's going to take years, right? Forget it. I mean, for just trying to do model checking on the protocol, like, why the hell would I get into that, right? And even if you could get that, I mean, you're going to have the IP protection. So then, researcher side will say, oh, no, if it's important for Ericsson, I should probably be able to make millions out of it, right? And then lawyers will get in there, and if you get into university lawyers, it's probably even worse because, that's a nightmare that many people know of. So ultimately, nothing is being done. So these guys here do excellent work, and we cannot take any advantage up there. Like nothing, zero. Makes no sense. So what we view as an open source vision for this is to say, well, wait a minute. There's a bunch of good things there. Okay, it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect. There's UML, there's Eclipse. PolarSys is trying to bring together a community. Papyrus 1.0 is there. It's not perfect. But from an Ericsson point of view, we're looking at this, say, you know what? It's certainly good enough for Ericsson to deploy for information modeling at a large scale. So, I mean, it's probably not that bad. And let's work on it. We've been essentially developing many tools with commercial vendors in the last 15 years. Not only we have paid and we have invested time, but ultimately we don't own the technology today. So we don't care about owning the technology. We don't want to own the technology, but we want to make sure we can use the technology and we can actually direct influence the evolution of the technology. If we do that, then maybe we can work in the same environment. We can actually it's open source. So people doing research can actually have direct access to an open source industrial strength solution. They can do whatever they want to the code. So they can do their model checker or their product line management or their model-based testing or their model-based tracing and debugging, or I can go on and on and on, right? And we can benefit from it. So then maybe we can have some hope to have access to a rich set of functionality without having a funnel, without having a single entity that is determining whether the resources are there or whether it's worth doing or whether there's a business case for it, right? But if we really want to build a community and we want to be successful from a commercial point of view, we also need to have commercial support for it. There are some companies that are willing to take this technology and take care of it internally, to customize it, to adapt it. I mean, we have resources in Ericsson, we can do it. But I would claim that probably 90% of the market don't want to get into this. Like the open source technology here could be seen as a platform. It has everything you want and everything you don't want. And it's not because it's bad, it's because that's what we want from the base tool. The end user, if they're using 3 diagrams, when they see a new diagram, they don't want to see 18, they don't want to see 13, they want to see 3, right? So it has to be customizable. I'm getting back to the simplicity of usage. It has to be possible to simplify. If I need a DSL, I have to be able to build a DSL, right? And this is one of the places where these guys can actually come in to be able to provide commercial versions to the developers, to the industry. But to be successful, we absolutely need to have a community. Without these 3 pieces, this doesn't exist. Without the end users, the suppliers are not there. Without the end users, the researchers are doing things that are not relevant to anybody. Without the input from the end users, the researchers will do very good things, but that will not correspond to necessarily what the end users want to have. Right? It's not because there's bad faith on either side. It's because until now, we had nothing that allowed people to directly interact together in a fairly free manner. IP and technology protection was always in the way. Did it bring good things? No. As I said, the conclusion is we have less today than we had in the 90s. Not in terms of quality. I'm not saying that the tools are not good. Don't get me wrong. It's not against any tool vendor, because I think that the business case is such that the tool vendor do what they have to do, right? It's just that if we look at it from an end user point of view, we have not evolved. So one thing I'd like to clear up, because DSM or DSL or DSML is a pretty tricky topic. So what we've heard very often is that, do I use UML or I use a DSL? That's the wrong question, right? You can have both. It's a tool issue, right? The question is rather, do you want to have a UML-based DSL or do you want to have a pure DSL? And then I could ask the question, what is a pure DSL? I don't know. But there's still a distinction. No, but there's still a distinction. I mean, what do you route your DSL in? And that's an important distinction, okay? If you use a UML-based DSL, it's going to cost you more. I mean, in terms of the fact that, from the point of view that you need to have expertise in UML, okay? The good thing is that there were years of development that were invested in UML as a foundational semantics. We may think that, you know, the designers, you know, the people, that UML is not that good, and, you know, but the people that were involved in UML for about like 10 years are not a bunch of stupid people. Probably costs around, I mean, we were discussing in, have to ask someone, but it cost like in tens of millions of dollars, right? There were full-time employees and a large number of companies traveling every month to get together. The very bad side, as Manfred was mentioning today, about UML, but it's not only bad things. So you can reuse, and there's a community, and there are things like some integrations that you can benefit from, which we believe is important from our side. You can also, in some cases, go and define DSLs at the lower level. It's simpler, you don't need UML expertise. But the key thing is that after that, you're not going to be able to benefit from a tool chain, okay, from integrations. On the other hand, I don't want to say that this solution is completely to be excluded. By no means. It's a matter of choice. It's a matter of analysis in all cases. What do you want to do from your side? It's completely different from one case to the other. This is the right solution in many cases. The solution, the way we're looking at this from an Ericsson point of view, is that as much as possible, we'd like to do things under a UML base, because if we're developing things like deployment analysis and in some of the integrations that requires the semantic level, then we can use it. Now, not everything needs to have this layer. Like we're doing things, for example, with OBO on the on EMF compare, on eGit integration. Well, most of it doesn't need to have the UML layer. It's done at the EMF level. At the same level, then you can define more of a MUF-based DSL. But in terms of other things, like model-based testing and number of things, then for us it's important to be UML-based. But again, I just want to, the important is to clarify the first question and to clarify that point, which is a tool issue. And then after that, it's a matter of analysis. As an example, this is one of the DSL that we recently developed for a group in Ericsson that is doing network architecture modeling. This is based on Papyrus, and you know, it has the customized menus, it has the shapes, it has all of the things we can do, deployment specification in there, and then these guys were using PowerPoint. So I mean, validation for them is something now they can dream of, and they have a lot of ideas. And when they were using PowerPoint, they could not do much. So there's a plan for this tool, but I just wanted to show that it is possible to actually develop a UML-based DSL that doesn't reuse everything you need in UML. So to conclude, just to complete that picture, yes, you can have this, and you can have the DSLs as well. So what's important for us is the community. Without this community, things, as I said, do not exist, right? And we need to have interactions with other end users. We need to work with the suppliers. Even if we're doing a lot of things internally in our case, like the richness of the things, the number of things we need to have in our environment, we're not going to develop internally. Our goal is not to become a tool development shop. Our goal is to be able to have what we need to control our destiny. We want to have our own committers, but we want to do as little work as possible internally if we can get it externally. The other good thing is that if we're doing it with a supplier, then the technology will actually be used by others. I mean, there will be more people to promote that technology, and that is also very important because the community will actually be dependent on it. And this role is key. I mean, this is where, you know, the students will actually learn the technology. This is where we will get the innovations. This is where, you know, the technology will be used in different projects as as a research platform. It's the same platform we're talking about. It has to be usable for different things. Now I have 2 minutes left, and I really want to get into the business impact. Because when I joined Ericsson a year ago, I had been the CEO of a company for 10 years, and I went through this movement of raising rounds of financing based on the old model of selling licenses. We're going to build this technology, invest for 2 years, and then we're going to do another round of financing and invest in the marketing, and you're going to see the hockey stick revenue curve, and then we're going to sell the company and be rich, right? And that was the model. That's what the VCs want to hear, but you believe that, you go to them. The business model was clear. You develop something, you sell licenses, then you sell maintenance and support. Okay? So essentially you sell the value the value you're developing today, you're going to sell for hopefully for 100 years. Right? Well, it doesn't work anymore. We need a different one. This model is dead. And when I joined, I started to ask the question, and everybody said, yeah, there's a business case. There's a well-known business model for open source. Everybody knows it, right? Okay, what is it? Talking to many companies these days, like many companies, small and big, like I think that companies, anyway, all of the companies are trying to figure out in this new era, what is the business model? People don't want to pay for licenses anymore. Things go open source. So what is it? I don't know, actually. But people don't know either. So what we can do is to reflect. There are a couple of things that we can think of, but the fact is, if we want to have a lively ecosystem of suppliers, we need to have a scalable model. Like just pure service doesn't scale up. You multiply your revenue by 2 if you multiply your risk by 10. So because you have to double your revenue, you have to double the number of resources that you have, your number of employees, and then liability goes up, and then 10 is too much. But to multiply revenue by 2, you multiply your risk by 4, let's say, right? So that's dangerous. So you need to have some level of scalability. And from a large company point of view, we have to pay attention to this. Because if there's no supplier, we have no ecosystem. We won't have commercial solutions. I'm just warning, please, the end users, the large corporations, we have to be part of defining this model in a responsible fashion, because otherwise we're going to get a model that we don't want. Right? We have an opportunity to get a win-win here. And then, that can lead to a rich community of providers. So if we look overall, I mean, what are the things that we can clearly identify as a need? Well, commercial support and maintenance and training, integration and packaging. As I said, if I set a company X and I have 10 developers, I mean, this tool can be very attractive to me in open source, but I need it to be packaged for me, and I don't want to hire 5 employees to package the tooling for my 10 employees. That will be overkill, too risky, and so on. So I'd like to be able to have an offer, right? Customization, development of DSLs, integration with other tools, that will always be there, right? And now the technology is open, so people can actually get in the code and provide those integrations and potentially sell those integrations. I'm not, and don't take it here as I'm throwing you things that you should be coming back with POs to me. I mean, I may not need these things at all. I'm just saying this is the reflection that we've done, and we organized a workshop at CEA back in March to discuss some. So this is a result of a collective reflection. It's not what we need necessarily internally. Okay, so that's very important. And I think that there are some pieces that can clearly be used to build successful business in that model. The value, people will make money if they continue to bring value. You will not make money based on the value that you were providing 5 years ago. No one will pay for what you developed 5 years ago. But they'll be happy to pay for the value you're bringing this year, though. Right? Because if I write a check, if I write a PO, I know that I'm going to get we're going to get a direct value for the amount of that PO. Right? And just something to leave you with. I mean, there were the Tesla announcement this year, this week, that many people probably heard of. But Tesla is a company developing technology for electric cars. And on the 12th, I guess they announced, I guess the decision was taken before, but they had walls full of patents. and they decided to donate all of the patents to the Open Foundation, realizing or under the assumption that their main competition is not the other electric car makers, but their conventional technology. And in fact, if they were opening up the set of patents that they had that would allow more companies to develop electric cars, that would increase the number of cars and reduce probably the price of the batteries and improve the technology and keep the leadership in the market. So I mean, for any end user company that is developing technologies and ask themselves, why should I put something in open source? In the Ericsson side, we're really much, at least the group of product managers that are working in open source, try to inverse that question, which is why should we keep it internal? Right? If we're developing something and it costs us nothing more to put it in open source and it helps building the community that will end up benefiting from us because there's a community, it's a good reason to do it. And as an example, we're starting to develop in the next 12 months, we're hopefully, well, not hopefully, next year, this time in Toulouse, we will be promoting Papyrus RT 1.0 that will have supporting the UML RT notation as it is supported in RSA-RT and Rhapsody and the other tools with a runtime. The runtime will actually be a new runtime that we're going to be developing with experienced people in the domain. And this runtime will be supporting deployment on multi-core, and it will be completely open source. We're not keeping it, we're putting it in open source, and the goal is actually to get the community going. Thank you very much.